Good. Let me just share the screen here, if I may. Hang on one second. What's going on there? Oh, there it is.
Madam Chair, if I may make a quick comment.
Sure, Mayor Eliger, go ahead.
I just want to apologize. I need to leave the meeting in about a half an hour for about 15 minutes and just wanted to apologize in advance for that.
Thank you, Mayor Eliger.
Okay. All right, now I think I'm set. So if I may, just to kind of recap for everybody where we were with the time we presented the budget, our 21-22 request was $198 million, reflecting an 8.8 million dollar increase over our adopted 2020-21 budget. It's about 4.65%. As I mentioned at the time, it was status quo, no real change in programming, but it did include the effects of the West Rock and Quinnipiac school closures. You've seen this exhibit before a number of months ago. It's the breakdown of where the spending is in the proposed $8.8 million increase. For those that may be seeing this for the first time tonight, I will call attention to the full-time teacher line. It's not more than a 10% increase. The issue there was, as you may recall, we had anticipated receiving significantly higher Title I funding than we actually received. Whereas we thought we were getting a little bit more than a $2 million increase and we're prepared to move teachers to that grant, it was actually a $400,000 decrease that we received in Title I, mostly driven by our lower enrollment over the last couple of years. So as you probably have heard from me before in prior discussions, 75% of our general fund costs are in personnel, out-of-district tuition, and transportation. All the full-time staff essentially are part of collective bargaining agreements with contractual changes in the three largest ones shown there. All the other salary changes were estimated between 2 and 2.5%. The drop in utilities reflects both the closure of the two schools, but other energy efficiency upgrades that we've done over the past several years. We factored in price escalation that's spelled out in any of our long-term agreements. And then our transportation budget does assume that we get back to the normal level of the managed school transportation grant, where we receive a $3 million offset to our costs versus what we received this year, which is just over 1.5 million. I had presented this slide a number of months ago. It was the proposed new items that we had in the budget for 21-22. You'll see a number of these are crossed off as we've been able to shift around funding as we became more aware of it. In terms of the new FTE support for bilingual, we've got that covered elsewhere. Our Set for Success programs covered elsewhere. The biggest one on there, the K-5 math texts, were picked up in Alliance and Title I, and so on down the list, which leaves, in terms of the items that are still listed that have a dollar value attached to them, a little over $400,000. So in this next slide, as I said at the outset, we were looking for an $8.8 million increase. Adding in the $402,000 from the prior slide gets us to a revised budget increase of just over $9.2 million. What we've proposed is using part of our ARP grant, that's the third COVID-related grant that we received, of $4.4 million over each of the next 3 years to reduce the gap that we have in our general fund. And I'll pause there for a second just to reiterate that this is a major departure in terms of what we've seen from prior federal funds. You've probably heard me and others speak to the point that you can't supplant your general fund. You can only supplement it. ARP did not have that restriction in it. So that was why the governor's proposed budget suggested that school districts use ARP money to offset their general fund deficits. The city committed to a $1.5 million increase for our budget recently. There's also $1.25 million in the current year Alliance grant that is non-recurring next year. And the two big pieces of that are a $450,000 set aside for the facility study that's not going to repeat in terms of a cost next year, and roughly $800,000 for our K-5 math texts. Those are a one-time purchase. So when you just subtract out those three items, the remainder to mitigate winds up being a little bit over $2 million. And just for context, at this point last year, when we were looking to put together the mitigation plan, the amount we had to mitigate was 5.6 million. So you can make a pretty good case that the biggest piece of the change year over year is those ARP funds that are now available to us that we did not have available to us last year. So in terms of looking at how we would break this up, attrition and turnover, we think we have the ability to continue to manage that aggressively going forward. We've done a good job of looking at outgoing salaries for particular roles, and looking at potential attrition in roles that we have, particularly within anything outside of the grades 1, 2, 3, where we're looking to add staff. We also think there's a lot of opportunity to maximize the value we get out of the state grants, particularly if we do that in conjunction with the new K-5 math program. We've had good conversations with the state over the past year or so around how to utilize our state grants to the maximum level possible. And so we think a fair amount of that can be done in conjunction with that. So very different in terms of what we had to talk about last year, where we were talking about a lot of programmatic activity and things being cut. This feels a little bit different. It's not quite as painful as what we encountered last time around. But it will still take some execution on our part to make sure that we have to have things lined up the right way into these grants. So we think there's an opportunity, as I said, to use some of the ARP grant funds to take the pressure off the general fund budget. But what we really don't want to do is create a massive funding cliff like we had with TIF. That's why we're only suggesting using 4.4 million per year over the life of the ARP grant. As I just mentioned, there's an opportunity to aggressively leverage our state grants in conjunction with the new math rollout. We really have done a very good job of managing turnover, so I give credit to the HR team in terms of looking at that and how we've looked at new hire salaries. And there's more opportunity to do the same going forward. So we think there's a very good opportunity to be able to execute the mitigation plan without taking on any additional layoffs or any painful programmatic cuts like we had last year. But we do need to work fairly quickly over the summer to make sure those expenses are aligned to the new funding sources that we've identified. If you attempt to do that mid-year, you lose some of the opportunity because obviously the salaries would have been earned out at that point. But that's kind of the high-level approach we're proposing to take in terms of doing the mitigation. So it's a very different approach that we had in terms of last year because we don't really need to go deep into any programmatic type of activities. With that, I know Dr. Tracy is here as well as other members of the management team, and we'd be happy to take questions.
Any questions? Mr. Golson?
Thank you, Madam President. I'm looking at page 3, where you're showing the line by lines, and I see a drop in support staff full-time, and I also see a drop in part-time and seasonal. Does that mean that we are losing seasonal employees or not filling, not seasonal, part-time employees or not filling part-time positions?
That's been the biggest piece of it, is we have not seen as much fill rate on those positions as we have in the past. And the schools have not been spending down that money in terms of what they thought they would originally have in their budget. They choose to spend it elsewhere.
And you still believe that you're going to see a drop in that line, even with the increase in the minimum wage?
It's a good question that you're asking because it's a question of whether or not it's enough of an incentive for folks to come back out for those positions. I think when we looked at where we were after schools reopened, we still were looking at a fill rate that wasn't where we thought it would be. So it's kind of hard to sort of peer into the crystal ball around the minimum wage increase. But I see the question that you're asking. In other words, if we go from 12 to 13, like we're supposed to do on August 1st, would that necessarily create more opportunity for people to come back out? It's a good question. I don't know that I can necessarily answer it, though.
Well, I also wonder, will it also cause an increase in the overall budget, or have you already figure that into this budget?
Yeah, so the way we do it isn't so much when it comes to those positions in terms of staff. When it comes to part-time, we have part-time dollars that we set aside. And then it's up to usually individual principals to then decide, how do I want to allocate those part-time funds and to what positions? And it would have to reflect the increased rate.
So we don't fill part-time positions based on a need so much as we do on a request from the local schools.
That's correct. When we allocate part-time funds within the general fund budget, it's done at the individual school level.
And does that mean that individual schools are seeing less money, therefore they are investing less in part-time classroom assistants?
Now, it shouldn't be, because we've kept their funding flat for the last 3 years that I've been here as part of a budget cycle.
Got it. Okay, let me see. I think that's it for me at this moment.
Madam President,
Dr. Joyner?
I
Thank you,
think
Mr.
it might,
Golson.
yeah, I think it might be unfair to characterize it as not being based on a need. It's a needs-based budget driven from the building up, and individual principals make decisions about the staffing that they need based on their total budget. I think it's been that way for quite some time. So if I'm the principal at Jagger Robinson Middle School, which I was, or at Hill House High School, and I know I have a broad budget, then I have to sit down with the staff and determine what personnel we can buy for that based on our needs, building needs. And in some instances, you know, you would want more. I think principals always want more, quite frankly. But it really is a needs base, but it's not driven from the top down. In some cases, it's driven from the bottom up. And the only top down stuff are the needs beyond the building.
The other thing to point out is that this is the general fund piece of it only. There's several $1 million linked to part-time staff in our special funds budgets. So this only reflects one piece of the part-time picture, so to speak.
Mr. Conway?
Yeah, as it relates to the part-time people, principals always want more. And that's why we go with special funds and grants money and general fund money. The issue is, though, when that's not available, we don't request it. It's not that principals don't want it. They want part-time people. It's just the budget is just not there to meet that, and principals just deal. They just make use of it. They just do what they have to do. But I've never known, in every building I've been at, principals always want more part-time people. That's one question, or one comment. And the second comment I want to talk about is the compensation equity committee. That line item has been empty, and I would like to know if we could start filling that line item up with, at minimum, the surplus from last year, and then even projecting forward for the next couple of years. I want to know if that's possible at some point, sooner than later.
Well, I think as I understood it,
Yeah.
and Dr. Tracy, you may recall as well, wasn't the directive from the last time we discussed compensation equity that there was a formal meeting request coming from that group regarding renegotiation of certain items in that contract? Dr. Tracy, you're muted.
Mhm.
Get that off. They're tired, but yes, as far as I can recall, Phil, you're correct. Yeah.
Just one quick question, Dr. Tracy. Has that request been made yet, or should it come from union? Should it come from me as a committee chair, where should it come from?
The equity team, that's what Mr. Goldston was talking about last time. The equity team, the charge of the equity team primarily was to look into part-time salary, if I'm not mistaken. But you guys went a different way and look at the full-time power salaries rather than the part-time. So that's now in, I'm not sure at what point you're going to return to that to address that situation. Because I remember the charge was to look into the part-time salary. And I know Phil at one point had presented that and it didn't go anywhere. One of the things we have to also remember that part-time workers are at-will workers. And it depends on, again, the needs of the school. A lot of the schools use their magnet grants to hire part-time workers based on their needs in those schools. And it's up to them what they want for the schools. We don't dictate from central office what they need. I know that during this year, because of the COVID and things happened, they did not need that many part-time workers because you can't have so many people Zooming with kids. That would be crazy. So they did not hire many part-time workers this year because of that. But now that we're going to go back to school full-time, hopefully, keep our fingers crossed, 5 days per week, they may see the need to bring in. But what we have done, and I'm sharing with the board, in terms of the equity issues and in terms of trying to make sure we accelerate learning, what we're doing, we're putting into our grant, we put in the grant, which is the ESSER 2, that we're hiring 87 teachers to work between first through third grade to split the class sizes to work with students in smaller groups in order to accelerate learning and to help with the learning loss that has occurred. So we have that already passed through in ESSER 2. So they may not see the need to have a bunch of part-time people in their buildings because of that need that is going in there. We have different types of part-timers who are not necessarily paraprofessionals. We have part-time teachers who come in and work in the arts for the schools that need part-time teachers. So part-time is very broad.
Thank you, Dr. Tracy. Mr. Wilcox?
Thank you. My question was one of process. Assuming we pass this budget this evening, the board can at different points in the future come back and revisit the question of what the total budget is. We could, for instance, add to this budget later in a month or more if we needed to for some particular reason. Is that correct? I just want to make sure I'm clear on the process and that we're not completely bound by this as a final budget without any possibility of change for a year.
But anything we add to the budget, we have to make sure there's a funding source. That because this is general funds and not special funds. We're
Right,
not challenged with special funds. We're challenged with the general funds.
I understand that. I just want to make sure that that there's not some process or thing I'm unaware of that this is the only time that this budget can be looked at, or can we revisit and add items to this in the future?
If we have a funding source.
Okay.
If we don't have a funding source, Mr. Wilcox, then we're adding to the deficit. We're gonna go into a deficit.
I fully agree. Identifying
Okay.
funding sources
All right.
is always
Yes.
needed in any budget, particularly when we're spending public money.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Mr. Golson, Dr. Joyner, and then Mr. Conway.
Thank you, Madam President. A couple of points. One is an issue that I raise every time around budget time. I don't understand why we don't have a budget with all of our funding, not just with general funds. General funds is about, 3/5 of our entire budget. There's still a big chunk out there that we are not reviewing or approving with this budget. And it's frustrating to me that we talk about a budget and don't talk about our entire budget. Secondly, in terms of a statement that Dr. Tracy made, where she suggested that this is a general fund budget, this isn't a general fund budget because this is at least, I think, $8 million over our general funds, as far as I could tell from the presentation we had. Even more so, Dr. Tracy suggested that we cannot approve items in this budget without having a funding source. Well, again, that is not true because we are approving a budget that is $2 million in the deficit at this point. We could call it dollars that we have to mitigate, but that actually means dollars that we don't have, which means dollars that we are deficit of. So this is a deficit budget at this point. We are not funding everything in this budget that we have, that we want to fund because we just don't have the money yet. So we're going to figure out one way or another where we get some additional money or where we make some cuts.
Yep.
So I want to make sure that we're all clear on that. This is not a balanced budget at this point. It's a deficit budget. In terms of and I agree with Dr. Tracy in regards to the equity study. I don't know how it ended up being a full-time para renegotiation of their contract. When the night that we approved their contract was the same night that we approved this equity committee in response to my request for and suggestions for an increase in the salaries for the part-time employees. And that equity committee was a response to that. So I don't know how we got so off track with rehashing a contract that we already voted on and approved, and the union voted on and approved. And I'm still not quite sure how we got there. And the final point I want to make is that, again, Dr. Tracy says we do not dictate to the schools what they do around part-timers, but we do because we provide them with the funding. And we provide them with the salaries ranges, and that dictates how they can spend that money. So if you go to a school and say you can hire part-timers, but you could only hire them at $11 an hour or $12 an hour, that's going to dictate their ability to be able to recruit and retain employees. So we as a board and central office as managers do have a lot of influence on how those schools spend their money eventually. And that is it for me. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Golson. Dr. Joyner?
I want to build on something Mr. Golson said. We really go down a slippery slope when we start talking about renegotiating things that have been negotiated. And it should be crystal clear that contract negotiations settle the question of salaries. They're the offer that we give, the offer that their rank and file vote on. And we can't open a can of worms by, talking about the renegotiating contracts with different employees. And we need to get back to the purpose that Mr. Golson indicated was the purpose of equity. The whole notion of part-time people, not full-time people, because we do open up a can of worms when we go in that direction. The other issue is that if you are a principal, you realize that you do have a finite amount of funds, and you sit down with your staff, typically your school planning management team and other confidants, and you decide, it's like running a household. You decide how you're going to spend your money based on what your perceived needs are. And even if you don't have the most competitive salary, most principals know people that they can get to come in and work if the salaries are at least at the level that the federal government says, or that maybe comparable school districts give. But oftentimes we can't even match that because we can't pay our subs the money that some of the surrounding schools pay. But some people would work in our district because they live in the community, and it's a lot easier for them to get to Hill House or Cross or Hill Central than it is for them to go to Spring Glen or someplace like that. So it can be a little dicey, and I think we have to, one, make it very clear that we're not renegotiating paraprofessional contracts, that this was about part-time people. And that even that is something that we have to be careful about, because while we may want to pay a lot more for some of those positions, the kind of district that we are, we may not be able to do so. And we don't want this money that we're getting under the Biden administration to delude the public into thinking that all of a sudden we're going to have this rush of funds over the next several years. That's not going to happen. We're going to have some funds for a defined period of time. And unfortunately, I think we've had an unbalanced budget for every year I've been on the board. And I think we look into our finances. There were times when we didn't have a CFO, and we might have had an unbalanced budget for the last 20 years. And that speaks to a larger structural problem in that our city does not have the tax base that it needs in order to fully fund the school system. And that's not going to ever go away until we address the structural underpinnings of that. Less than 50% of taxable properties in the city. And that's a real problem. And it puts a burden on everybody, including the school district and taxpayers. So Mr. Goldson's point, I share that this is not about the contracts we've already negotiated. It's about if we can find more competitive resources to support part-time people, but we may not be able to do that. But I don't think anybody's trying to hide any money. I think everybody on this board wants to pay a fair pay for people that work for us. But it's just unfortunate that we are, like if we had a household, that there's certain things that we cannot buy because we just don't have the income stream to do it.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Mr. Conaway?
Yeah, let me just first say that we're certainly not trying to renegotiate the paraprofessionals contract, but there is an equity issue there, and because they had new leadership, we had new board members, new superintendent. There's this newness, and when that took place, we wanted to mitigate some things with the paraprofessionals. The second thing is I want to say is I totally support, the part-timers, and trying to give them a raise. They're on the low end of the totem pole. And I'm going to continue to advocate for, both those issues, both the paras, because and it went that way because that's, that's the way it went in committee. After several meetings, and we were, and our next step is to support the part-timers. It just takes a long time to do both of those. But I just want to be clear: we're not trying to renegotiate the Paris contract, but we are trying to advocate for equity for them and equity for the part-timers.
Thank you, Mr. Conaway. Any other question or discussion? Okay, seeing none, I guess I'll entertain a motion to adopt this budget for school year 2021-2022. Is there a second, or is there a motion? Excuse me.
I move to adopt the budget for 21-22.
For purposes of discussion,
Mr. Wilcox?
I'm sorry.
Hold on.
Second.
Mr. Goldston. Thank you. Any discussion? Mr. Goldston?
Thank you, Madam President. I have submitted to my fellow board members a proposed motion to amend this budget. That motion, with your permission, I'd like Dr. White to put that motion up so that the board members and the public can see it. If I could get a second.
There a second to amend the motion?
Madam Chair, question of procedure.
Dr. Joyner?
Is it appropriate for a motion to be made regarding that at this time?
No, it's not, because this is a special meeting and we can't amend the agenda of a special meeting.
Madam President,
Mr. Goldson?
may I ask, how did you arrive to that conclusion? Under what authority?
So I spoke with the attorneys. But with the special meeting, it's the item that's just on the agenda, not amending the agenda. That is the topic of discussion.
Which attorneys did you speak with, Madam President?
I spoke with Attorney Alexiadis.
And Mr. Alexianis does support your position that this item is not proper and in order?
Attorney Alexiadis, go ahead.
Okay, I want to be sure that nothing's lost in translation. So thank you, Madam President, for calling on me. It depends on the nature of the motion. If the motion is to amend the agenda to add an item, then that cannot be done at a special meeting. We're limited to the agenda item. If the motion is to amend the budget, then that is within the existing agenda item for discussion of the proposed budget. You're discussing the budget, you can vote items up or down as you so choose. So it depends on the character of the motion. Mr. Goldson has referred to a written motion, so it would be helpful to either hear or see the text of the motion to opine accurately.
Thank you, Attorney Alexiadis.
Madam President, may Dr. White put that item on the screen for folks to see? I'll also again forward it by email to all of the board members again.
Dr. White, please share the motion.
You waiting for a second?
Right, we were waiting for a second.
Second.
Hasn't been seconded. Dr. Jackson,
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, did you say that was seconded?
yes.
Thank you. So I'll read the motion for the record. It's a resolution budget amendment to set the salary for part-time paraprofessional staff at the New Haven living wage of $17.48. I'm suggesting that we add additional funds to the budget to raise the part-time non-union paraprofessionals, no other part-timers, just the part-time non-union paraprofessionals, to provide a living wage as set forth in the New Haven living wage ordinance, which would be, I believe, 130% of the poverty rate for a family of four, which is currently at $17.48. That these part-timers are currently paid at $12 per hour for no more than 19.5 hours a week. They are not allowed to participate in other school paid activities, including after-school programs, since they could not exceed 19.5 hours. They are not represented by unions and do not have bargaining agreements. In a previous report that the CFO gave us, there were 149 part-time paras with an aggregate salary of less than $1.2 million. Though they currently make the minimum wage of $12, the Connecticut minimum wage will rise to $13 on August 1st of this year, less than 60 days from the date of this meeting. Within 2 years, the minimum wage will rise to $15 per hour. Again, as I mentioned, New Haven currently has an ordinance which defines a living wage or a minimum wage for contractors doing business with the city at 17.48. Of course, we are exempt from that ordinance, but I think that we should follow the ordinance for our employees, which are city employees. And this ordinance has been in effect, I think, since 95, maybe. So it's been in effect for over 20 years, over 15 years. This amendment will put us ahead of the curve, raising the wage to a level where we would not have to plan for increases for the next several years. It also provided the living wages as defined by the city of New Haven. As we all know, the minimum wage is going from $12 to $13 in less than 2 months, 14 July of next year, and 15, I believe, June of the year after that. So what I've done is I've outlined 7 different proposals. The one that I support is the 17.48. But all of these proposals going from 13 to 17.48 are obviously on the table if folks want to negotiate this. But I think that this puts us in a pretty good position. The proposal that I'm saying, which is proposal 7, puts us in a pretty good position because it allows us some breathing room over the next several years, not to have to negotiate this. And also it puts us ahead of the curve, so we're not always chasing the minimum wage every year, but we're ahead of it. Thank you, Madam President. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not finished. I just have a few more points. I just want to remind the board of the history of where we are. Back in 2020, well, actually, back in 2019, I proposed raises for part-time paraprofessionals. It failed. February 24th of 2020, I proposed it again. This board tabled it and asked for some information from the CFO. We received a staff memo from the CFO on February 27th. We received an additional one on March 2nd. On March 9th, I proposed again raises after those staff memos, raises for the part-timers. It was again tabled. There was another staff memo on March 13th, and then another motion by me on March 23rd, myself and several board members, which also failed. On July 27th, we raised the issue again. It failed, and instead we formed this equity committee, which then never dealt with the part-time issue for almost a year now. Instead, didn't even meet until January 27th, more than 5 months later. They had their first meeting, decided to focus on the union paraprofessionals, and gave us their first report on May 24th of last month. And so we've been dealing with this issue for several years now, over 3 budget cycles, and have continued to kick the can down the road. Again, we said we were going to put together an equity committee to deal with this issue, which took 5 months to meet, almost a year to present us with their first report, and again, never even dealt with the part-time issue. Madam President, I say it's time to stop kicking the can down the road. I think it's time that we add a little bit additional money to that deficit that we're confident we're going to mitigate. So we move it from $2.2 million to $2.5 million. And I think we've done a good job of mitigating our budget deficits in the past. And I think we will continue to do a good job, and at the same time provide our part-time paraprofessionals who are in the classrooms with our most neediest of students with a semblance of a living wage. It won't take them out of poverty, but it sure will help them. As you can see from the chart that I put together, they are currently the average, a person who's working 19 hours a week, or 3.9 hours a day for the I'm sorry, what's that? For the entire 180 days, makes a weekly salary of about $234 and an annual salary of about $8,400. This raise would move them to a weekly salary of about $340, which is a little over $100 raise a week, and put them at a $12,000 a year salary, which is about $3,800 more now than they're making. $3,800 more than they're making now. So, Madam President, I would urge my fellow board members to adopt one of these suggested raises. But I think we should be doing something. We can't kick this can down the road another year and feel confident that we're doing the right thing. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Golson. Attorney Alexiadis, your
Yes.
opinion now?
Madam President, if I may inquire
Sure.
through the chair, which part of that is the actual motion? Because I know the last part, Mr. Goldson identified it as points, so that sounds like discussion or argument in favor. The written document looks like, which he read a large part of it and then added some additional information. The written document looks like a motion at the top and supporting documentation with some options. So I think we need to be clear on what on what exactly the motion is, and what just so we're clear, I take no position on the motion. I'm here to advise. That's board members' sole prerogative. I'm here to advise as to the procedure, and clearly the board can take up a motion to amend the budget, but this document is phrased at the top as a motion to amend the salary. So I think a motion to amend the budget would typically refer to a line item and identify an amount that the budget is intended to be amended by the motion.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll be happy to make some changes to the motion to make it clearer to Mr. Alexianis and my fellow board members. The motion would be to add $573,000 to the part-time employees line item to raise part-time paraprofessionals salaries to $17.48 an hour. Is that clearer for everyone?
Attorney Alexiadis?
Sorry, that would appear to be within the within the agenda for discussion of a budget item. You know, the other way to do it is to separate out the budget increase versus the salary increase, but the motion includes both.
Thank you, Attorney Alexiadis. Mr. Wilcox and then Dr. Joyner.
Thank you, Madam President. I am pleased to take a look at this and see that we are in the proposed budget going to be going with Proposition 1, which is the part-time folks will be getting a raise to $13 an hour, as outlined in Proposal 1 there on August 1st. If that proposal is to make that July 1st, then that would probably be very negligible in terms of the funds involved. And I don't know what a difference a month would make, but I know it'll make a big difference for the people if they are actually working in our summer programs and so on. But I am pleased to see we're at least getting to one of the proposals. I'm gonna not support this motion though. Today was the first time I saw the details of this, while my colleague has explained to us the many different times that he has expressed that this is something that he is in support of. And to be honest, I've not heard a single board member not express support of raising wages for part-time people that are not part of any bargaining unit. This hasn't gone through the Finance and Operations Committee. I don't know what the details of this are going to be in terms of the cost. And previously, we've had proposals where it's presented that it's only going to cost X number of dollars, and we find out it's going to cost $1.5 million once all the math is done. I don't know, out of that 149 paraprofessionals, part-time paraprofessionals that are involved here, does this include all of our part-time staff? I also think that it starts to intrude into our bargaining units where we have some of our contractual workers that are not making the $17.48 an hour wage that's proposed here. Again, I'm not against any one of these things. I just want us to make sure we know what the true costs are and that we have a way to mitigate them and that we understand what that path is. While we have had our superintendent and our CFO talk about today that they do have a pathway to mitigate the budget that they're proposing, I haven't heard today that they have a pathway to mitigate the budget that they proposed plus this $500,000 plus whatever else that's going to come from this in a ripple effect as we have to take a look at our other labor contracts. So again, I'm not against the fundamental idea of paying people more money, but I do want us to be able to have a sense of what this is actually going to cost. And we can pass a budget tonight as proposed, and then we can at Finance and Operations meeting start to take a look at what these costs are going to be. And that next meeting is on Monday. And I'm going to be happy to take a look at this because this is not something we've seen over the last several months while we've been taking a look at this. And don't believe it was also talked about or presented in the Pay Equity Committee, which is a public meeting, and any board member, I'll just remind you, can propose information to us in Finance and Operations Committee, and that committee will take a look at it. Just like we've looked at minority and women-owned contracting last summer, we revised our agreement memo form based on board member input to collect the information that board members requested we collect. We've taken a look at our not to exceed change orders. We've looked at legal expenditures. We do the work that the board charges us to do. And I'm seeing this as a charge as well. We're finally getting some concrete details here, pretty late in the process, but I'm happy to start taking a look at this, and I'm hoping my colleagues are as well on the committee as early as Monday evening. It might be a little difficult because we're going to be without a CFO, which is all the more reason why if we would have had this information in February or March or April, we might have been able to have that experienced CFO leadership on this subject. But I'm sure the great people on his team will be able to provide some of this information for us. So all that said, this is not something I'm going to be supporting tonight, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Dr. Joyner?
I'm going to paraphrase a quote, to err is human, to correct is divine. I have a problem with this based on something that I think we've been doing wrong, at least for the 6 years I've been on the board. And I think there were reasons why we did it in some cases, but it probably still was wrong. That this really is a management decision and not a board decision. Because in every organization, the chief executive is responsible for compensation and for negotiations and setting pay parameters. It's not done by the policy body. We're a policy body. So I think there's an error in the first place that maybe we can start by correcting it now. Doesn't mean that we can't try to create more equitable funding support for the people that work for us, but we need to stop treading onto management. Also, I'm going to disagree with our lawyer. He said that we could discuss this, but it was not stated in the notification that we would discuss those contracts. That compensation. And I'm going to disagree with him. Of course, I disagree with the Plessy versus Ferguson case as well. So you're in good company. And I agreed with Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas. The other thing is that we don't know enough about the issue. Based on my experience working in schools, that many of the part-timers do not use these jobs as a sole source of income. And it's usually a support for a pension that they may already have, or they may, at least all of the ones that worked for me when I was a principal had other jobs, and they worked for me part-time. I think that Mr. Wilcox made a good point when he said that in some ways we would be compensating them at an hourly rate beyond that of the negotiated contract that we have with our paras. And I think that's problematic. And I think the bottom line with spending money is that you always have to weigh any amount of money you spend against broader considerations. And our broad consideration is to create the best learning environment for children, the best teaching environment for teachers. And certainly if we were a wealthy district, we wouldn't have to do this, because I think that the chief executive officer would do it and say, listen, I want to give them the best pay, and I expect the best performance for that pay. So I can't support this under any circumstances, because I think it's really under the responsibility of the superintendent to make these decisions and to put them in her budget, because in some ways we're undermining our own budget in a sense. But I appreciate the morality behind it. And I know that Mr. Golson has always been a champion of impoverished people. And I think everybody on this board is that. We're just in a tough environment. So there's nothing intended by it. But I don't believe that it should have been discussed in the first place, because it wasn't stated in the notification. And I believe it's a management decision. And I think it's something that we should ask the superintendent to work on, if there's anything that she can do about it. But given what I know about finances and about financing urban school districts, it is what it is.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Mayor Elicker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm not going to support the proposed amendment, but I do. Well, I almost always agree with Dr. Joyner. I do disagree that the board doesn't have authority around this issue. We can set a policy to pay staff a living wage, or we could set a policy to determine what we believe that living wage might be. And I feel this issue is a very important issue for us to explore. On the city side, we're increasing our seasonal worker pay from $13 to $15. I think that this is an ethical question. I think it's a question of equity and fairness as well. And of course, it's a financial question, which is why it's important for us to, I think, not decide this right now, but get more information on the overall financial impact of it. And I'm sure, and I understand Mr. Golson's raised this before, the frustration of, this is going to take a long time to review things, but I think we do need to understand what we're getting into if we do increase the pay. There's also different definitions of what a living wage would be, depending on the number of children you have, for example. And there's also, in addition to the part-time paras, there are other Board of Ed staff that get paid a low wage as well. And so we have to look at what an increase for one classification of employees might, how that might impact other classifications of employees. But I think that both the spirit, the intention, and the purpose of this proposal is one that we should explore and act on in the future. We should be wiser when we do so. But I do think it's very important for us to act on it.
Thank you, Mayor Elicker. Dr. Jackson?
Over the past months, I have helped people who have not been able to buy what they needed for everyday living. And one of the things I'm finding is that, while I agree with the mayor where he says that, it depends on what someone has in their household, what a livable wage would be for them. But for most of the people that are working like this, they're not getting anything extra. So if the school is closed, you know, if they don't have overtime, if they don't go to work, they don't get paid. There's nothing, there's no like safety net for them. And so this is almost this is almost for me, and I can't imagine why it's not for anyone else, an easy vote, because I'm voting for people to simply be able to buy groceries. I'm voting for people to simply be able to pay their bills. And it's never been so apparent to me than what we've been through over this last year with the pandemic and all the fluctuation in people's incomes, you know. And and I've been blessed, and I say, wow, you know, that could be me. That could have been me for, you know, for whatever reason, but it wasn't. And I believe that these people, who most of them live in our city, most of them receive, you know, most of them are at the lowest as far as socioeconomic, like where they live. You know, they may not have a car. It's just, we can, I believe that in the long run, we will be able to handle that. It's not thousands. I think, what did you say, that whatever the number was, and it's not going to put a dent in our pocket. We're hiring people and paying for things that are a lot more than that. So, I mean, I really will feel bad if we're not able to vote this in. I think it's gonna almost be like a slap in the face to those people, because they do deserve more. So I'm voting for it. I think we all should vote for it. None of us had to experience what any of these people experienced over this last year around basic things like food, roof over your head, transportation, and what have you. Even can't even afford to buy a mask. So we should give them this increase.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Mr. Goldson and then Dr. Tracy.
Thank you, Madam President. You know, first of all, I'd like to put to bed this whole argument about whether or not this is proper and in order. Mr. Attorney Alexianos and I may disagree on things at times, but I absolutely agree with his position on this, and I'll tell you why. Because I got the same opinion from the Freedom of Information Commission, which when I reached out to him today, that any other board member could have done. And I sent you all their opinion, their written opinion on whether this is proper or not and in order. And they have agreed with my position and Dr. Alexia and Attorney Alexianos' position that this is proper and in order. So I don't think we need to have any more discussion about that. We have both our attorney and the Freedom of Information Commission both supporting that position. In terms of waiting again, talk is cheap. You know, we've been talking about this for 2 years. You put together an equity committee to deal with this issue, and after a year came up with nothing, jack, zero, zilch. And then you say, let's wait some longer. This proposal that I put together was put together with the numbers that the CFO presented to us in several different memos over the last year. The 149 paraprofessionals is a number that he gave us. The 19.5 hours was a number that he gave us. The 8,400 a year, if they work full-time, is a number he gave us. These are real simple numbers. You multiply the $12 by the 19 hours, by the 180 days, and you come up with the total budget. So it's not confusing. It doesn't have to go and get vetted again. It's been before the Finance Committee several times. So just suggest that this is something new and late is unfair to this whole process that we've gone through over 2 years. To suggest that you don't know, you don't understand the numbers. I actually limited it to the paraprofessional part-timers because you all complained about all of the other full part-timers and not having exact numbers for that. So I said, okay, let's take this a little piece at a time. Let's start with the paraprofessionals and work our way through the system. So I made it simpler for you, just so you wouldn't have those arguments to make, just so that you could have all the information in front of you. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand this. And what is really frustrating to me is to continue. I said at the meeting where you developed the equity committee, I said two things. One, I want to be on that committee, and I was denied access to sit on that committee. Secondly, I said, I believe that this is a stall tactic, that nothing is going to happen. And you all slammed me, said I was questioning other board members' motives and so on. And guess what? A year later, nothing, zilch, a stall tactic. You had an opportunity as the committee, as the finance committee, knowing that this issue has been on the horizon for several years.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Joyner?
This is casting aspersions on the motive of other board members. And while I appreciate the morality behind Mr. Golson's cause, which I share, it does not help us to be casting aspersions against the motives.
If it appeared that I was casting aspersions, that was not my goal, Madam President. I'm just pointing out the facts. I'm sorry if I suggested anything otherwise. I did say that on the record, and it did happen. Nothing came of that equity committee on the part-time employees. But to suggest this, that the finance committee had plenty of time to add this item to the budget, they didn't do it. I don't know why. I don't know why. I mean, they heard a report from the equity committee. They were aware of the fact that the part-timers weren't included. They didn't ask for more information about the part-timers. They had plenty of time to deal with this issue, and they did not. So talk is cheap. To suggest that we need more information is not true. We have all the information that we need. We have $2 million raises in the management line of this budget. Not one question, not one discussion around that, just accept it as is. I'm asking for $500,000 more for part-timers, and we have an hour-long discussion about whether we have the money to do it. We don't have that discussion around the full-time employees. We don't have that discussion about anybody else in this administration except for the part-time paraprofessionals who don't have representatives.
Point of order. The full-time people have an advocate that works to negotiate their salaries. And once those salaries are negotiated, the contract is legally binded on both parties, and we have to pay those. Unfortunately, in every organization, many part-time employees are subject to the discretion of the people running the organization, as well as the resources, the financial resources of the organization, and the importance of the duties that they perform. So it is really improper to compare the two because they're not equivalent.
That's a very good point, Madam President, and I'd like to reiterate what Dr. Joyner said.
Dr. Joyner, your point is well taken, Dr. Joyner.
Of course, it's always well taken. Thank you, Madam President. I would like to suggest that Dr. Joyner is correct. They have representatives who are able to negotiate for them, including the fact that one of their representatives is negotiating against their union. How fair that is, that's a whole discussion we could have. But the point is, they do have representative support negotiating for them. These part-timers do not. They are not represented at the table. And we should make it a priority to make sure that we at least consider them when we're putting our budget together, and we did not. There was no discussion whatsoever to raise their salaries. So Dr. Joyner makes a very good point. They are not represented. They are not treated fairly. So, Madam President, I would suggest to this board that it's time to say, let's do the right thing. We've been kicking this down the road for 2 years. We put an equity committee together to study this issue and didn't even study it for a year. And now we're back at the same place again, approving a budget that already has a built-in deficit. So we don't seem to be real concerned about that at this point. So let's just add a little more to the deficit and take care of this issue and do the right thing. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Golson. Mr. Wilcox? And then Dr. Tracy, if there's no one else.
Again, Finance and Operations Committee is going to be happy to take a look at this. As been said, there's plenty of time to take a look at this information, but there hasn't been plenty of time. I'm trying to remember in a previous meeting, we were throwing around things like a quarter an hour, and now we're talking about moving it up to $17.48 an hour, which is higher than we're paying some of our contractual workers, which means that this is going to ripple through contracts, because we're not going to be able to be for very long in a situation where we're going to be paying part-time people more than we're paying our full-time people. So obviously,
Madam President, point of order. Madam President, point of order. Madam President, the full-time employees have other benefits besides salary. They have financial benefits. They work
Not a
full-time.
proper point of order.
Oh, but it's proper when Dr. Joyner says it.
Go ahead, Mr. Wilcox.
Oh, my God.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
While our contracted employees have other benefits as part of their contracts, what union is not going to use this decision to then say we need to reopen the pay decision? And again, I'm not against this. I'm not against adding money for part-time folks. Administration has not been either, has proposed various things at different points. Today was the day we actually saw some details with an actual number attached, that now we can take a look and see what are the ripple effects that this actual number is going to have. If we had this 2 months ago, we had this a month ago, we would be able to take a look at this.
Madam President, point of order. Madam President, point of order. The chairman of the committee is misstating the facts. This similar memo was given to him, to this board on February of 2020, of 2020, over a year ago, with the same facts. So he's misstating the facts when he's saying that this is the first time this has been brought to the. Thank you, Madam President.
Please continue, Mr. Wilcox.
It very well could be. I want to apologize to my colleague on the board if I was misstating the facts. I see many facts that come across in over a year on this board. I might have forgotten this particular fact from this particular member. And if so, then I don't want it to be looking like that I am purposefully misstating it. And I do apologize for that. I will go back through my email and review that information.
Madam President, point of order. For my colleague and the board, I could send you that memo right now. It's a copy of the minutes and a copy of the memo where it was included from the staff, from the CFO. So the information is available, and in order to clear
it's not a point of order
to
tell me that you're going to send me an email. I mean, come on.
I'm telling you what the facts
All
are.
I'm saying is I remain in opposition to this. We need to see what this is going to cost. This is why we have committees to do the work. This is why we have governance committee to take a look at policy things before we just bring them in front of the full board. This is why we have a finance and operations committee. This is why we've been talking about the budget for a couple of months. If we've not been doing it to the satisfaction of some board members, perhaps they could have participated in the process, utilizing that email that they were talking about in order to bring that to the top of the agenda for that finance and operations committee. I suppose if I was trying to poke at this issue for the last 6 years I was on the board and was a failure at it, I might also be upset, but
Madam President,
I'm going to make it work on the Finance and Operations Committee.
He just referred to me as a failure, Madam President. Come on now. Madam President, is that a point well taken?
No, it's not a point well taken, Mr. Dalton.
Okay.
Mayor Elicker? I just want to point out really quickly, the email that was sent around from the FOIC, it doesn't talk, what it talks about is amending the budget, not a wage increase. So really this we shouldn't even, I'm not supporting this amendment to the agenda for that reason. I think we're all supportive of looking at wage increases for the part-timers. There's more to look into this, which is why we had the Pay Equity Committee look into this, and they haven't. So I guess F&O can take it and take a look at it. But at this time, I cannot support this as is. Mayor Elicker? Mayor Elicker, did you have your hand up?
I did, and I think my internet's not great, so I apologize if that's a problem, but
That's okay.
just a reminder about point of orders are for procedural issues. It's not to just, for everyone on the board. I'm not saying anyone in particular, but for everyone on the board, point of view, we should try to be more sparing about using them. I think that it raises an important question of what the status is of the pay equity committee work. And so I would suggest that Mr. Conway, who's the chair, at the next meeting, give a more in-depth report about what the status is of the work that they're doing. I think we need to trust our committees, but let's hear from Mr. Conway about what the status is. Probably now is not the right time, but my hope is that perhaps the next meeting, and my hope is that the administration works with Mr. Conway, because I think all or almost all the board members have expressed an interest in trying to do what we can on this issue. So my hope is that we can see that presentation next time.
Well,
Thank you, Mayor Elicker. Go ahead, Mr. Conway. Before
yeah,
Dr.
we,
Joyner.
I just wanted to say we did talk about part-time salaries in our committee. It was just too much mixture with what the paras were saying and what the part-time that we want to separate the issues. I'll take full responsibility for not bringing that to the top of the agenda, but I do support the part-time wage increases. I just think we have to look a little bit more deeper into it and find out exactly where the money is coming from, and make sure that figure of $500,000 or $600,000 is right. And I also want to continue to advocate for the full-time paras. And I guess that's what happened. We got dominated in that committee by that, and that fell off the burner. I apologize for that, but I support it. I support it. Now that it's at the top of the agenda, we really need to make some serious decisions about it. And if there's something that there seems like there's a lot of uncertainty, but because it's at the top of the agenda right now, we need to continue to keep it at the top of the agenda. But I just want to make a correction. We did speak about part-time salaries. It just got dominated by the paras, and it now needs to be rolled into the whole equity issue.
Thank you, Mr. Conway. Dr. Joyner?
Well, this is just to commend all the board members for working really hard to try to be civil and over something that's really a contentious issue. And to also remind us that war among grasshoppers delights to crow. We're not the problem. It's the system around us that's the problem. And we got to work through that, and the greatest good for the greatest number. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Dr. Jackson?
I just would like to know to my colleague, Mr. Conway, and my colleague, Mr. Wilcox. Can we have a timeline around when we can have an answer? It's been a long time. I agree with Dr. Joyner. This is systemic. And really, we know that I know that most of these part-time powers are Black and brown. And this is part of poverty. It's part of poverty. So when can we what is the time frame, since this is obviously not going to pass? I am going to support it because I think that we're hiring people at a lot of money salaries. We could give these people a couple dollars. This is not $150,000. This is a couple dollars. So I would like to know a time, a date. What is your deliverable date for, yes, this is going to happen, no, it's going to happen? Mr. Conway, Mr. Wilcox, how much time do you need? Because this has been going on for like a year, I think. I think we should know. So can we have a time frame? Madam President, if you could encourage that, please.
Mr. Wilcox?
So as far as the time frame goes, the Pay Equity Committee reported at the last Finance and Operations Committee, and then they reported at the last board meeting. So we're talking about that information was presented just in the last couple of weeks. This will be on the agenda for the next Finance and Operations meeting. I'm not going to give an answer as to what the exact time will be, because a lot of this depends on the administration being able to present information and provide it. They are about to go without a CFO, and that might make it difficult, but we'll keep it on the agenda and look at it every week. I'm not sure about the the Pay Equity Committee. Mr. Conaway can address that. I would hope that we could have something in place for these folks before the start of the school year in August. I'm not talking about, a year or 2 or 3 years. I'm talking about we just need to see what these costs are going to be. And I would also like us to see how our mitigation efforts are going. And I'd like us to be able to have something in place for folks around the start of the school year in late August.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Mayor Elicker?
Nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Elicker. Dr. Tracy, I skipped you a couple of times because board members kept wanting to speak on it. Go ahead, and then Mr. Goldson.
I know. I just want to caution all of us that we have different categories of part-time workers in the system. It is not just part-time paraprofessional. Not all our part-timers are paraprofessionals. So I need us to bear that in mind. There's several categories of part-time workers that are in the system, and they're not necessarily part-time paras. So I just want to say that. And also, we have to think about in our part-time categories, we have folks who are retired teachers or retired, from pension, who are in pensions and also working part-time to supplement their salaries, or just like working outside of the house because they just want to be occupied doing something else. So for this board, I just want to caution you on that as we do these planning and considerations. And I'm not against, say, getting people more salaries for what they're doing, but I just want to put that at the top of the list there. That then are we going to disaggregate and say, okay, this part-time person is just working to supplement salary, or it's just something they're doing because they just want to continue working. For example, Mr. Conaway is retired. And he may want to say, okay, let me take on, someone asked me to fill in at a job over here, I'm going to do that. That's what I'm talking about. There are different levels and different types of part-time workers in the system. We cannot assume that they're all paraprofessionals. That's just a point I wanted to make.
That's a great point.
Thank you, Dr. Tracy. Mr. Goldson?
Thank you, Madam President. The CFO gave us several different memos over the last year. He spelled out what positions were part-timers and how many were in each position. We were clear about the different part-timers. Some were assistant teachers, some were this, some were that. There was a whole issue around that, which is why I limited this resolution, which I suggested several times, said several times, to just part-time paras. Of course, and I also said that I expect in the future we would talk about other part-time positions, but this is the one I'm most familiar with. This is the one that people have most approached me about, and I felt obligated to deal with this issue, unlike some other board members. Madam President, I shouldn't say surprised, but I'm not surprised, a little shocked that you would allow my colleague to suggest that I was a failure and not correct that behavior, Madam President. And it shows very clearly the difference in the way board members are treated on this board by you. There's no equity on this board.
Point of order.
Dr. Joyner?
Just say it's well taken and let's move on. Your point is well taken, Dr. Joyner. Can I continue on, Madam President?
You're out of order, Mr. Goldson.
Okay.
I can't wait until our retreat because we can't keep doing it like this. And I would hope that we can have the emotional
Madam President, this is not about procedure. He's out
It's
of order with.
casting aspersions on,
Madam
it is
President.
about procedure. It's about our ethics. It's casting
Madam
aspersions
President, he
on
casts
the
aspersions on
motives
you.
of
Is that what we're
other
talking
board
about?
members.
I'm not
Thank
gonna
you.
listen
It's,
to
I can
Dr.
give you, I can
Jackson.
cite you it in our bylaws.
Okay, then that's what we need to do. Thank you.
You're suggesting that Mr. Wilcox was wrong
You're out
and
of
calling me
order,
a
Mr.
failure.
Bolton. You're
I have
out
the
of
floor,
order.
Madam President.
You're
I
out
want
of
to finish
order.
my point.
Finish your point.
Okay, thank you, Madam President. His point is well taken, right? You forgot to
Finish
say
your
that.
point, Mr. Bolton.
Okay, Madam President, so I'm asking you, are you going to deal with that issue of this board member casting aspersions on me? Is that an issue you're going to deal with?
Of course, you take it into that context. Mr. Wilcox, go ahead.
Madam President, I'd like to apologize to my colleague, Mr. Darnell Goldson, for using the word failure in relation to his ongoing fight to raise part-timer salary. That was wrong on my part to insinuate that, to say that, and I do apologize, Mr. Goldson.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. And that is the way that we should be dealing with each other. And I appreciate your apology, Mr. Wilcox, and I wish the president had helped facilitate that. Thank you.
That is exactly the way. Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Any further discussion? Dr. Joyner, you have your hand up, your virtual hand up. Is that from before or is that a new question or discussion? Thank you. Okay, so seeing no further discussion, we'll vote on the issue of amending the agenda to include, go ahead, Attorney Alexiadis. You're
I'm
muted.
sorry to interrupt, Madam President, but we're not amending the agenda. I think you missed it. It's a motion to amend the budget proposal, so it's technically a motion to amend the pending motion to approve the budget proposal. I mean, the language the language that I, from my notes on the motion is that it was a motion to amend the budget to add $573,000 to the part-time line item to raise part-time paraprofessional wages to $17.48.
Thank you. That is
No.
correct. Thank you. Mayor Elicker?
No.
Mr. Wilcox?
No.
Mr. Goldson?
Yes.
Mr. Conway?
Abstain.
Students are not here. Dr. Joyner?
No.
Dr. Jackson?
Yes.
And I am a no. So that motion fails. So we go back, Mr. Goldson?
Thank you, Madam President. Considering that people thought that motion was a little too big a pill to swallow, I'm going to make one more motion, Madam President. It's a smaller pill and hopefully some of us can swallow it. We're going to have.
Dr. Joyner?
I don't know why we keep adding to this agenda business that we did not show the public that we would be discussing. And it doesn't mean that it can't ever be made, but just like at one of the recent meetings, one of the board members objected to a governance motion, and we all agreed. I'm objecting that this is out of order, that our sole purpose in this meeting was to pass or not pass the budget, and not to go inside.
Madam President, point of order. Madam President,
you.
point of order. You have an opinion both from your parliamentarian and from the Freedom of Information Commission that says that the budget can be amended at a special meeting without previous notice. You have no reason.
I don't see that in FOI.
Those opinions. I sent you the FOI Commission.
Well, I can read for myself.
Hold on. Dr.
Madam
Joyner,
President,
hold on.
so Madam President, it's clear that amending the budget is in order and proper. And I would suggest that we move on and allow me to make one more amendment, Madam President. If you don't like the
Madam
amendment.
Chair, can I
you vote
respond
against
because I
it.
have the FOI information right in front of me?
Hold on, Dr. Joyner. Attorney Alexiadis, you had your hand up?
I was only going to, and I really don't want to be talking this much at your meetings, Madam President, but I was only going to point out that we have not heard Mr. Goltz's motion yet, so we don't know what he's going to say.
Yep.
And so,
Go ahead, Mr. Goldson.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Mr. Attorney Alexiadis. I would propose an amendment to the budget to increase the part-time line by $794,000 to raise the part-time paraprofessionals' salaries to $15 an hour.
And that's sort of in the same line. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Madam President. May I speak on my motion, Madam President?
Go ahead, Dr.
Thank you, Madam President. If you don't like the motion, you can vote against it. No one can stop me. You don't have the right to stop me from making a proper motion. You could vote against the motion. You could explain why you're voting against the motion, but you can't stop me from making a proper motion, Madam President. And this is, again, proper and in order. Madam President, in 2 years, we're going to be raising these employee salaries to $15 an hour anyhow. So we might as well get ahead of the game, especially while we're flowing in money right now, and get to that $15 an hour, so we don't have to deal with doing these incremental raises and again chasing the state minimum wage over the next 2 years. I'm not going to make a long discussion on this because we've already discussed it to death. I'm hoping that board members, knowing that we're going to have to do this within the next 2 years anyhow, would be willing to agree to this motion to add this small $313,794 to our budget. Thank you, Madam President.
Mayor Elicker?
I agree with Mr. Golson that the motion is appropriate, that he has the right to amend the agenda. I also agree that we should be increasing the minimum that we pay our employees. And I want to hear from the administration after they assess this. We have increased, after we did our own lengthy assessment on the city's side, our seasonal employees from $13 to $15 an hour because we felt like it was the right thing to do. I want to hear the administration's assessment on this, not now, but through the committee process.
Thank you, Mayor Elicker. Any further discussion?
My hand is raised, Madam Chair.
Dr. Jackson.
We can move these people to $15. That's more realistic than the 17 that he had stated before. $15 is what people are making. This organization can afford to move the lowest paid of our employees to $15. They're the most vulnerable. And I understand what Dr. Tracy said, but we're talking about the part-time paras. Most of them are the most vulnerable in our community to suffer issues around food insecurity, around housing insecurity. We can afford to give them $15, seeing that it's basically where most people are. We don't need an investigation to tell us it's the right thing to do because we know it's the right thing to do. $15 is more realistic. We should move these, our most vulnerable employees, who are our most vulnerable community members, to $15.
Going on in my kitchen, I don't know. Mr. Wilcox?
As I've been saying, I'm all for raising these pay rates. I think $15 an hour sounds like a much more doable thing, much more easy to mitigate. And again, we'll have this on the agenda for the F&O committee on Monday in just a few days. so that we can see what the implications are with our other labor contracts and our other pay rates. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to get that information from the administration, and that we'll be able to look at it at FNO and maybe look at this in our next full board meeting in a week and a half. But I will not be supporting this at this time because, again, for all the various reasons I've stated before, I want to know what all the implications are with our labor contracts and our other pay rates, because even though this is specifically limited to one group of people, I don't know that this is going to remain with this one group of people. And I think we're all in general agreement that raising the rates for all our part-time people to that raise or to that level would be the right moral good thing to do. So, but I am also going to want to know what this means for our other labor contracts and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Dr. Joyner?
I'm going to commend every single board member for having the real concern about the people in our city that are suffering. But as I've been told, we should do everything through our processes. So we have a committee set up to do this. We have a process, and we shouldn't do stuff in a quick way. So I'm not going to support this motion because I think it has to go through committee process, and I think that we need to not do this outside of management because there are a lot of other issues that we have to look at beside this item.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner.
Madam Chair, I have a question. It's for Dr. Tracy.
Go ahead, Dr. Jackson.
Thank you. Dr. Tracy, the part-time paras, do they go like basically not work during the summer? Are they the workforce that basically doesn't work during the summer and then they come back in September? Is that what?
You're muted, Dr. Tracy.
I'm Dr. Jackson. Some of them work in summer programs if the summer programs employ them. So we do have part-timers who work in summer programs. But not necessarily, not necessarily a para. There may be tutors, you know, some of them are students who come and work in the summer program as part-timers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Dr. Tracy.
Welcome.
Okay, and so seeing no further discussion, we'll vote on Mr. Goldson's item. Can you restate the motion, Mr. Goldson?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. The motion is to amend the agenda to add $313,794 to
Amend the budget, not the agenda.
Did I say the agenda? I'm sorry.
Mhm.
The motion is to amend the budget, the line item, part-time employees to add $313,974 to that budget to raise part-time paraprofessional salaries to $15 an hour.
Thank you, Mr. Goldson. And so with that, Dr. Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Wilcox,
No.
Mr. Goldson,
Yes.
he's not here, Mayor Elicker,
No.
Dr. Joyner.
No, let's follow the process.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. Mr. Conway?
I abstain.
Thank you, Mr. Conway, and I am also a no, and so that motion fails. And so now we go back to the motion of adopting the budget as presented by Mr. Penn. Any discussion? Seeing
Amber
none.
alert.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Mayor Elicker.
Yes.
Mr. Goldson,
I cannot vote for the inequitable budget. No.
Mr. Conway,
Yes.
Dr. Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
And I am a yes, and so that motion carries. The budget has been adopted as presented. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second,
what is happening behind you, Dr. Tracy? Second, Mayor Elicker,
Yes.
Dr. Joyner,
Yes.
Dr. Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Wilcox,
Yes.
Mr. Goldson,
yes.
Mr. Conaway,
Yes.
and I am a yes. Good night, everyone. Meeting
And
is
Madam
adjourned.
President, let
Yes,
me thank Mayor Elicker and Dr. Jackson for joining us in the hike and in the hike today up the mountainside. Yes.
I
very great
didn't
hike.
walk.
thank you.
Thank
We
you.
are climbing
Jacob's
Thank
ladder,
you.
not no
Jacob's
mountain.
ladder.
Okay, bye,
Good.
everybody.